One topic that has got great attention from many of the audience, a discussion on China's reform and opening up. First, some words on the dignitaries on the podium. Sitting next to me, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, the 8th Secretary General of the United Nations. What I want to emphasize in particular is that he has a new hat now, the Chairman of the Board of Directors for BFA.
今天后边如果有时间的话呀，我们会拿出一小段时间，请潘基文先生作为博鳌亚洲论坛新任的理事长，也跟大家讲几句啊。潘基文现在就想讲，好，我们就请潘基文先生讲两句。
你好 how are you doing? Thank you very much. It's a great honor for me to be elected as new chairman of World Forum for Asia at a critical timing when the older countries, particularly Asia, is transforming into a much more globalized society. The President Xi Jinping in United Nations in September 2015 announced a vision that he would be committed in creating a community with a shared future. That really inspired all the member states. He repeated it today. This morning he also made a very important, inspiring statement further opening up and reforming the Chinese industrial and financial sectors. And that was quite an important one. As a new chairman of the World Forum for Asia, I'm committed and I'm ready to work with all of you to make sure that not only we promote economic and social integration in Asia, but we should go transcending Asia. We should work much, much more for the promotion of socio-economic and sustainable development, for co-prosperity of all the people around the world, particularly for those countries in the developing countries. I think President Xi has already laid out very good visions and mechanisms like Belt and Road, which will be supported by Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB. So there are a lot of visions have already been made today. I'm very much inspired, and as a new chair, I'm ready to work with you. Thank you very much.
好，谢谢潘基文先生啊。
Thank you,
也恭喜您
Mr. Ban Ki-moon, and also congratulations on wearing this new hat. We believe it is of a great significance, and we expect and we believe under your leadership you will lead us for a better future. Next to Mr. Ban, Madam Wu
好，我
Xiaolian,
们就带着潘基文先生开了一个
of
好
Exim
头
Bank
呢
of， China.
也请您对今天上午
Now,
习
I'd
主
like
席
to invite
刚刚发
Madam
表的这
Wu
个主旨演讲，谈谈您的一些
to talk
观感。
about your opinions and comments after listening to President Xi's address. Well, I listened attentively to President Xi's speech. One of my observations is that I can keenly feel the sense of responsibility of a major country in face of the numerous challenges of the world. How should we move forward? What should be the direction that we choose? I think President Xi has given us a very clear-cut answer. He has reviewed the past, and he has given us his pondering and thinking over the logic of history and progress. And he has a good understanding of the sync of the time. He has made it very clear that we should be in line with the progress of the time and tide. We should adapt to the time and have proper leadership. He has expressed one thing very clear, that we should uphold globalization and China's positioning of reform and opening up. He has affirmed this, and I'm impressed. This is also an announcement to the world that China will pursue forward with the reform and opening up, no matter how big the difficulties are, and we will continue this path. Thank you for your comments on President Xi's keynote speech. I can identify with you, and I believe most of us also do so. CCTV had brought a live broadcast of the President Xi's address, and I have a similar feeling as you do. I can find the strong determination of China to press ahead with reform and open up. And sitting next to her, Mr. Jean-Pierre Farfan, former Prime Minister of France and outgoing director of the board of the directors. I hope you can continue to play your essential role to the development of BFA. So I'd like to solicit some of your comments on President Xi's speech in the morning.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. Today, we have two very important inaugural speeches. First one is from Xi Jinping, but the second one, you just heard it from Ban Ki-moon. And it was a very good speech, and I am confident that you will be a good driver for Boao Forum. Thank you to have accepted this responsibility. Thank you so much, dear friends, Mr. General Secretary. For me, one point was very important this morning in the speech of Mr. Xi Jinping. The point is, the key of development is opening up. Opening up, opening up, opening up. I think it's very important. Yesterday night, I was in front of Mrs. Lagarde and Jack Ma. They have debates. And Jack Ma said something very important. When trade stops, war starts. That's the reason why this speech this morning is very important. Because our world is very, very dangerous. And I disagree when somebody is talking about economic war. War is not a good word in any case. So I like competition, I like diversity, but I don't want war. And against war, the best way is international cooperation. No nation can succeed right now alone. We need international cooperation, and it is the best answer. So this morning, for me, the main point is this one: opening up, opening up, opening up.
好，谢谢拉法兰先生。您刚才这段话讲完之后，今天我们就拥有3个伟大的演讲。
Then after that, we have 3 greatest speeches today.
好，接下来呢，我们介绍再下一位我们的嘉宾是中国证券监督管理委员会的副主席方星海先生。欢迎你谈谈对习主席讲话的认识吧。
So your comment.
这个习主席讲话非常重要，我呢还在继续这个。
Well, that is so important. I'm continuing my learning on his speech. And I have a refreshed understanding each time I read it. I enjoy his speech. I hope he could have spoken longer. That's my impression.
好，希望通过在座的媒体，通过大家的平台，把 方主席的这个
I hope
感受和要求。
His impression and his request can be conveyed
接下来呢，我们再介绍一
to
位来宾是澳大利亚的前外长鲍勃卡尔先生。
Mr. Bob
欢迎您，
Carr,
也请
former
您
Foreign Minister of
谈谈对习
Australia.
主席讲话的
So I'd
观感。
like to solicit your comments.
As a kid at university, I studied Chinese history. That was the time of the Cultural Revolution, and China was closed to the world, and the world very largely was closed to China. Embargoes and all the rest. And then, 40 years ago, in that historic third plenum of the party's 11th Central Committee, December 1978, historic decisions were made. I remember 1978, I was a journalist, and out comes Time magazine, America's Time magazine, and in 1978, who did Time make Man of the Year? Deng Xiaoping. I knew this was significant. I carefully tore the cover off and I pasted in my office on the wall this picture of this small but powerful personality from Sichuan province, because I knew that if he changed China, he would change the world. And it came to pass. What I thought listening to President Xi's speech today was that this period of reform in China now occupies well over half the life of the People's Republic of China. And that process of reform that started with those brave decisions by that third plenum have been strengthened, that process of reform strengthened and deepened and broadened in that visionary speech we heard this morning. And that changes China and it changes the world. And one quick thought, politicians have got to be brave enough to defend imports, not to lament imports, not to say imports are a bad thing for a national economy, but to stand up and say, as the President said today, that if China imports more, that's good. It's proof positive of the maturation of the Chinese economy.
好，进口。您听到了习主席非常
So you heard an important message from President Xi that we hope China can have more imports, and we will never deliberately seek after trade surplus. So we all have expectations in this regard. I believe China can do it. So today's discussion, an important message is the past 4 decades of China's reform and opening. The previous speakers all mentioned their impression against the reform and opening. So next, I will ask you to talk from your own perspectives, your own experience in the China's reform and opening up, to summarize China's progress. On your left-hand table, there is a board and a pen. You can write down one sentence to sum up your impression or comment and judgment and feelings of China's reform and opening up in the past 40 years. So just one sentence, write it down. And later on, we will show it to the audience. And you can also explain in details the sentence you have written. So while you are writing, I have one sentence to sum up. I think there are 4 things in the past 40 years. One is a big thing. Why is it big? I don't need to elaborate on that. Second, it is a difficult thing because the past 40 years have seen so many unprecedented things happening. Even to date, we still have tough battles to fight. Third, it's a new thing. Usually it's difficult to do something new, and the world is innovating nowadays. And number 4, it is a good thing. It can benefit the Chinese people and the world. So the big thing, difficult thing, new thing and good thing. To do it well, it's a very daunting task. So, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, you actually write down both in Chinese and English.
好，请您围绕这句话，请您解释一下您的含义。
The remark you have written down.
I don't know how to pronounce in Chinese. In Korean Chinese, 公尊公用, this means co-prosperity.
说得很准，很准确。
We live together for common prosperity. I thought President Xi Jinping's main message was co-prosperity. This is a community with shared future, which I said. This is a far-reaching one, and I am very much inspired. 40 years ago, China was one of the poorest countries, most restricted, completely closed to the international community. As President Xi said, with a determined and consistent policy of opening up and reform, China has reached to the stage of where China is enjoying and respecting as one of the two largest economies. Now, in terms of foreign reserve, in terms of trade volumes, I think China is now almost number one countries in. Of course, the whole economic scale is still you have to go much, much more in the future. In that regard, President Xi Jinping's strong commitment was a reassurance of Chinese continuing with the wider opening, much more committed to reform in every aspect of your industries, societies, particularly when it comes to financial sector, insurance sector, where a lot of negative criticisms have been leveled against China. While international community, particularly Western world, they have been very much appreciated, and they really wanted to expand their business relationship with China. But while China has been committed to sell much more of yours to other countries, but you have been mostly closing, and there have been a lot of bureaucratic red tapes, and the question of accountability and the transparency and rule of law. Those have been the concerns of international community. When I say that the Chinese success has not been without criticism. Now, the moment that has come now, the Foreign Minister Bob Carr said that 40 years ago, Deng Xiaoping announced this reform. Now, after 40 years, I think this is a second such a big commitment for much wider opening and much reform. All the systems must be compatible with the international standard, which have been commonly used. If I may say that, in fact, China, while having opened to the world during the last 40 years with reforms and opening up, I think China has been the biggest beneficiary of free trade system. In 2001, if one asks me a question, what is the most important reform and opening of measure? I think I can tell you that that was joining the WTO in 2001. That was a commitment by China that you will play the fair game, abiding by all these rules and regulations of international free trade system. Through this, I think you have become the biggest beneficiary. You are now the number one trading countries in the world. But with this second statement today, very historic statement by President Xi Jinping, I'm sure that this will be very much welcomed by international community, and this will be very much appreciated by international community. Now it's a question, how sincerely, how truly a Chinese government will make sure that all what President Xi Jinping has committed today publicly will be carried out in a due process. That's what I'm asking China continue to do. As a former Secretary General, while serving at the United Nations, I have been working so closely with the Chinese government. I have been really trying to work with your government for common prosperity. That's why there is no country, no single country in the world who can live alone. That's why we have to live together. When there is no country, there is a saying that no country is an island. You are not living on an island. We have to live together. Otherwise, we will sink together. I am very much happy and inspired by what he committed today. Let us work together for common prosperity. Thank you.
好，谢谢潘基文先生。
Thank you very much, Mr. Ban Ki-moon.
就像您所说的，
As you
中国
said,
不仅是多边贸易体制的积极
is an
参与者、
important partner
受益者，
of and beneficiary of the multilateral trading system,
务实的推进者。
and is also a
记得前天
facilitator of
习近平主席
such
在
systems. I believe that
潘基
when
文先生的
Xi
接任
met
者，现在
the
的
successor of
联合
Mr.
国
Ban
秘书
Ki-moon,
长
Mr. Guterres,
古铁雷斯先生讲过一句话，
and Mr. Gutierrez
中
mentioned
国现在是
that
多边主
China
义的最重要的
is
支
a
柱。
most important pillar for the multilateralism. I think this remark is in compliance with Mr. Ban Ki-moon's idea. So next, I will give floor to Mr. Ha Fahan.
那个小提板给大家亮一亮。
Please show us your board, your whiteboard.
A new urban civilization.
Please use the microphone. Microphone, please.
Thank you. We need always a Chinese. A new urban civilization, new growth, then consensus. I make my first trip in China. You were not born in 1970. And now I'm going to China 5, 6, or 7 times a year. What is the main change? The city, the urban civilization. With a new growth, with a new mobility, and new environment strategy. I think it's very important right now because in the world, everybody is talking about city and urban civilization. And now every country is looking for the smart city. And it's Chinese impulsion. It's Chinese pushing to work, to think to the new city and the life in the city. So everybody has a lot of problem with rural area. That's a problem. But the new city with new mobility, and this morning I have heard some new reforms, very important, about, for example, the car industry. And I think that the mobility in the city is very important, and this country is one of the smartest countries in this matter. The main point is that China wants not to follow the West country about growth, but to invent a new growth, more qualitative, more inclusive. So this new growth is very important. If you read the 12th plan from China, it's very interesting to understand what the new growth could be. And what is very interesting, 40 years ago, Mr. Deng Xiaoping chose the strategy of openness and reforms. But right now, each country needs to have this policy. For my own opinion, in my country, our new president, Emmanuel Macron, is going on to reform the country. Our reforms are not the same as the reform in China, in the United States. Each country has its reforms. But we need to make reforms because we need to adapt our society to the new world. So we need to make reforms, but also we need to be in a strategy of openness. I think there is no winner with protectionism. There is no winner. Everybody is loser when we have a protectionist strategy. That's the reason why I think 40 years after, Mr. Cheng is one of the best politicians of the world. Reforms and openness is our strategy everywhere except in the United States. But maybe they will understand a day. Thank you.
好，我能作证。
I can prove that Mr. Hafahan actually visited China multiple times every year. Last time when I was on the same stage with Mr. Hafahan is on a China-European Smart City Development Forum. So next I will give floor to Mr. Bob Carr. Please show us your board. Microphone, please.
As in the Tang Dynasty, China opened to the world, and the world opened to China. The opening, great opening, that was set in train by Chinese leadership in 1978 had a resonance in Chinese history. When in this 600 to 900 in the Common Era, a Chinese dynasty opened China to all the visitors who would come to it from Asia and Central Asia, some as far from Europe, with their ideas and their art, and at the same time sent Chinese creativity to reach those far-flung places. And that's the essence, opening to the world and seeing the world open up to China. I think China is a huge beneficiary. The OECD forecast in 2010 figures I found so astonishing that last year I tracked down the chief researcher. The OECD said in 2010 that between 2012 and 2030, China would add 850 million to its middle class. That's not a middle class of 850 million by 2030. It's 850 million people being added to the existing middle class. And I quoted this in a few speeches, but I thought it's such an important and such an astonishing figure, I should track down the man who came up with it. So I rang Mr. Homi Karas, who had left the OECD. He is now at another institution. And I said, do you stand by that projection? And he said, well, it's interesting. When we came up with that figure, that 850 million for the OECD in 2012, we were only able to conduct surveys of household spending in 3 Chinese cities. He said, for the updated report, which I can share with you, I've just finished it, we're able to conduct those household spending surveys in any number of Chinese cities. And he said, my conclusion has been strengthened, except in one respect. By 2030, that Chinese middle class will account for not 18% of total global spending, but by even more, 22%. Now that's a definitive measure of how beneficial to China. And by the way, all the business economists I talk to are saying now they are more confident today than they were 3 years ago that China is going to pull off this continuing transformation throughout the 2020s. What a vision it is. Wouldn't one love to have Deng Xiaoping in this room today to let him know that his brave, his astonishing vision of 1978 is being confirmed before our eyes.
好，谢谢您。您刚才谈到了您那句话，谈到了中国的唐朝。
Thank you so much, Mr. Bob Carr. You've recalled the Tang Dynasty. Yes, indeed. Back then, we had this great idea of opening up, and it associates me with one of the questions that have been asked to me by one of my foreign friends. He asked me, now you are championing the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. Are you rejuvenating back to the Tang Dynasty? So, Mr. Fang Xinghai, if you are asked the same question, how would you answer? Are we rejuvenating ourselves back to the Tang Dynasty? In the modern time, the Chinese people are striving for modernization. Once we have realized this vision, I think we are modernized and we have rejuvenated ourselves. If I'm asked to use one sentence to summarize my impression of the past 40 years of reform and opening up, I should say China's manufacturing has changed the world, and for the next years to come, China's finance will change the world. Well, we have all witnessed how China's manufacturing has transformed and changed the world in the past 40 years. In the morning, President Xi emphasized on our continued efforts and determination for opening up. And in that big picture, China's financial industry will also change the world. The world needs financing. Even a developed country like the United States also needs financing, for example, to refresh their infrastructure. So the biggest reserve of money is not in United States, but in China. China has a big saving rate, and we have a large number of saving deposits. And if we can use this pool of money and finance the world, we will change the world.
方主席，先不要关话筒啊。既然你刚才提到了习近平主席今天上午围绕着金融业的开放，提了新的主张，那就请您作为中国证监会的副主席来再深入的谈一谈，今天习主席的这几句话会给我们的资本市场带来什么？给世界金融业又带来什么具体的变化？
bring to China's financial market and that of the world. Well, if you read carefully, after his ideas on opening up, he has put forward two expectations. The further opening of the financial sector will enable China's financial sector to become stronger. China's capital market will be stronger and more dynamic. And for those of us who are working in the financial regulatory bodies, we have on our shoulder great responsibilities. We hope we can implement President Xi's expectations.
很务实的表态啊！
Thank you. I think
那我们现在手里边的有这个小字板的最后一位胡小莲女士，让我们看看你的答案。
Let's see what you have written on the board.
这个是最简短的哈。
So this might be the shortest
我这
path.
个两个字呢，主要是受到了习主席今天上午讲话的
I
一个
think I have written this word because I'm enlightened by President Xi's speech. He said, when a nation wants to modernize itself, there are all roads that can lead you to Rome. China has selected a path with Chinese characteristics, and this selected path has won tremendous achievements. And how did we come to the decision that we will select and follow such a path? I think the wisdom of Chinese people came from reform and opening up. The unwavering efforts, the unyielding determination were also inspired by reform and opening up. A better system which supports modernization efforts can never be separated from reform and opening up either. Therefore, I believe the greatest result, among others, for reform and opening up might be that we Chinese people have found our path to modernization, benefiting not only China but also the world by demonstrating good case of how can we modernize ourselves. I also want to say that reform and opening up is a one-way trip. We cannot return. It is not a round trip. So I have selected this word, path.
好，谢谢您。确实，道路这个词儿呢，我们全世界所有的人们其实都在思考这个词儿啊，并且在自己的历史进程当中。走着一条只能往前不能倒退的道路啊！我们刚才提到了像鲍勃卡尔先生提到了中国的唐朝，其实呢，我们今天的民族复兴要从历史当中去不断地汲取那个伟大的创造精神，但是运用这个创造精神，并不是为了回到曾经的某个朝代，而是要继续的往前走。就像胡小健女士所说的那样。那我想问潘基文先生，因为您呢？曾经做过10年左右的联合国的秘书长，您跟太多的国家直接去打过交道。在您之下的联合国呢，也曾经为很多国家去找到最适合自己的道路。联合国也发挥了很重要的推动的作用、帮助的作用。那结合中国走过的这40年的这条路，在您看来，中国这条路，这个选择的过程和坚持走它的这个过程，对世界上其他一些国家，会带来什么样的启发？请您从您的角度来谈。
Certainly, there will be a lot of areas China has been leading by example to help not only Chinese people and Chinese economy, but for other countries who really need such support, like developing countries. That's good example is that when the United Nations proclaimed the Millennium Development Goals in 2000, at the beginning of a new millennium. There's number one goal to cut in half the number of people living in abject poverty by 2015. The World Bank proudly announced in 2010, 5 years before the target year, that the United Nations and world has achieved that number one goal. But that was only possible because of Chinese contribution. China has lifted almost 600 million people out of poverty. That's why we were able to meet the number one target, but worldwide, globally. But there are still so many another almost 1 billion people are still living in very poor condition. Those people go to bed with hungry stomach. But China still can be a driver in making sustainable development goals accomplished. When I met President Xi Jinping last November, and he repeated somewhere recently that China will make sure that by 2020 you will be able to lift at least 30 million people who are living under abject poverty. And by 2020 you will have Shaogang society. That is a good example that other countries can learn from Chinese lessons. It's important that Chinese people live in prosperity and well-being, but it is also more important that all the people around the world live in prosperity. And in that regard, the core prosperity, which I wrote here, is what President Xi Jinping's message meant today. Another good example which China has led is a strong commitment on climate change. It was extremely difficult to have a Paris Agreement adopted in December 2015. You may remember that how long this negotiation has been taking since 1992 when Kyoto Protocol was first adopted. It took 25 years, but without Chinese strong commitment and leadership role, working with the United Nations, we could not have been able to adopt it. One very moving and important occasion happened when President Obama and President Xi Jinping and myself, three gathered in Hangzhou on the occasion of G20 summit meeting in 2016, that US President and Chinese President submitted the document of ratification, instrument of ratification of Paris Agreement so soon after. That has really sparked, has given a driving effect to many people, many countries in the world. So when they knew that China was on board, they were sure that this will work. So this will happen in coming 12 years when we have a target date of Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. The statement he announced today is aiming for co-prosperity, living together. I've been always saying as Secretary General, and even after that, we are all in this together. We are all in this together. You cannot live alone. No country in this tightly interconnected world, because of the transformative development of technology, communication, and transportation, we are living in a very small world now. There is no boundaries, no China, United States, or Japan and Korea. We are just one. We are all in this together. If we work together, I think we will all be able to swim together. Thank you.
是的，就像您所说的，世界今天啊，有的时候你会发现，因为我们的合作，因为我们共同的交流，它会变得越来越大。
It becomes bigger and bigger, but sometimes, because of such efforts, it becomes smaller and smaller. Every country is seeking its own way. In this relativism, actually, because of reform and opening, China is more closely linked with the world. As the panelists sitting on the stage today, they're coming from China and all over the world. I have actually given a task to Mr. Fang Xinghai. I asked him to ask questions to our foreign friends. So now I will give floor to Mr. Fang. I want Mr. Fang to prepare a question to Hafa Han, and then Ms. Hu will ask a question to Ms. Bob Carr. Actually, I have a question for Mr. Hafa Han. The previous speakers mentioned that China has embarked on its own way in the past 40 years for success. It changed China and changed the world. My question is, obviously, this way or this path is different from that of the European Union and the United States. So if China continued to be on this way, China will be more developed. As a big country in the European Union, for example, France, to see China embarked on a very different path and become stronger and stronger. So is there going to be anxiety for the French people that they may kind of doubt their own way?
Some people are a little bit afraid. Firstly, I would like to say that the way of China is very clear. And in this complicated world, a great nation, a big nation, has to be clear, has to be predictable. Some leaders are not predictable. China is predictable. If you read the books of Mr. Xi Jinping, if you read the paper of the Congress, you know where China is going. You know what is the future of China as the Chinese want to go. China is predictable. 3 points, 3 levels, very strategic, 3 levels. One is global level, the vision. The vision is shared future for the mankind. With 2 points, very important, multilateralism, dialogue, and to be very offensive for climate change. 2 points, the vision for everybody, for China, but for every country. The vision, the action, the means is the Belt and Road Initiative to have project, concrete project for Asia, for China, but for Central Asia, for Europe, for Africa, and a lot of countries. Vision, action, organization, socialist with Chinese characteristics.
But sorry, will you begin to doubt your own system or not?
Not at all. I think that you have to understand for respecting. When you understand, you can respect. Because you know that China knows where China wants to go. And we have to understand what China wants. Vision, action, and organization. And the organization is the socialism with Chinese characteristic. So that we have to understand that China don't take the same way that the United States, that Europe. See, it's another way. We have to accept that, and as it was said this morning, we have to respect that. And this thing is very important. For example, it's not the same case in my country, the leadership of the party, but in this country, if you don't understand the leadership of the party, you don't understand the country. So I think that when things are clear, you can understand and you can explain to the people why they have to be confident and don't be afraid. I have seen in my country, in the past, many periods where people are afraid. They are afraid about American products. When Coca-Cola arrived in France, we were used to drink beautiful wine. What is Coca-Cola? And Coca-Cola everywhere. Whoa, what is that? It's dangerous. And after that, we have Japanese television. We have a lot of Asian products. So, and some people are afraid, of course. And now, some people are afraid about Belt and Road Initiative. Because when you have a very important project with a very strong country who is a driver, you can be maybe afraid. But if we can explain, as it was done this morning, that it's a win-win strategy, and we need growth. And we need a new growth, inclusive growth. That's the reason why I'm confident in the future. Because China gives us three very important things. A good thinking about the new growth. A good thinking about projects. We need projects. We need to have concrete projects. And Belt and Road Initiative is a support for concrete projects. And it's very important to have projects. For example, we have projects right now in France. We have Chinese people who are working in the subway in Paris. And a French company is working in the subway in Shanghai. Maybe together they can propose to other countries a cooperation between two countries in third country to develop on the road subway, for example. So we need to have concrete projects. So firstly, we need to have a new thinking of growth, more inclusive. We need to have projects. In Europe, we have projects in the past. The project was the Plan Marshall after the Second World War. But nowadays, the Belt and Road Initiative is 10 times what Marshall was. So it's very important to be concrete. And I think that we have to explain to our people that the answer for us is not a theoretical answer. It's a practical answer. What are our projects, our company, our rules? And to be around the table. When you have such a great project, you have to be on the table, not in your corner in the room alone. You can't do anything if you are alone. But if you are around the table, you can say, I have project with my company, with my rules, and we have to discuss. And I think that's the point that it's very important right now. If we want that the world will be peaceful, we need to have common project. And at the end, but I can't speak about that just in front of the General Secretary because he knows this very well, we need to have dialogue and multilateralism. And it's very important to see, for example, China supporting UNESCO, supporting the action for peace from the United Nations. We need to have multilateral support for a dialogue and a multilateral dialogue. And I think I finished by that. I think that it was very strong this morning is that we are different. We need respect. We have to respect the organization of the other. We have to respect, we have to dialogue, but we need to have common project and common strategy. So I think that we can explain to our public opinion they have to be confident and they don't have to be too much afraid.
Okay, so as long as China is understandable, you will not be afraid of our way of doing things.
I think the most dangerous is unpredictable.
好。
Thank you very much, Mr. Haifahan and Mr. Fang Xinghai, for your question and answers, so that we know that Mr. Haifahan can even speak Chinese, 马马虎虎. Mr. Ban Ki-moon actually asked me with his eyes, what does 马马虎虎 means? Actually, I can answer you now that if we use the reform opening up logic, 马马虎虎 can be explained as the horses, horse and tiger needs to find their way, and they will respect each other and embark on their respective ways. As long as they can move to the right direction, it will be a good way, no matter for horses or for tigers. Ms. Hu, please raise a question for Ms. Bob Carr. My question is actually reflected in the previous dialogue between the two. In carrying out the Belt and Road Initiative, some Westerners have biased views concerning that, and it's a kind of norm. If we undertake infrastructure projects, some Western countries will think we have ultimate purposes. Maybe we have some secret interest, or maybe we want to have some manipulation of the hosting country. So such bias formulation what's supporting it? What's the logic behind it? I want to hear the view from Mr. Carr. Because in some Australian people, we also heard such voice. The previous two speakers mentioned that if we explain clearly, we can erase people's doubt, and the world will be very simple. But actually, the reality is much more complicated. President Xi, in last year's Davos Forum, and also in this year's inaugural speech today, and also in the Belt and Road Summit last year, and also in the Johannesburg meeting, President Xi has reiterated many times of China's stance and has explained very clearly and authoritatively, but still there are some doubts and suspicions in the Western society and a lot of the biased views. So, as a representative from Western countries, can you share with us your ideas? What is behind such a view? Microphone, please.
The rise of China is happening with such speed that a lot of Western countries are uneasy because nothing like this has happened before in human history. 40 years of reform and opening up. No country has done this. No country has hauled so many people from poverty into middle income status in such a short time. This is unparalleled in human history. What happened in America between the end of the Civil War and 1920 wasn't as big or as concentrated as what has happened with China since 1978. So a lot of the world is shocked and challenged. One European diplomat said to me a few months ago, we used to see China as a partner. We then saw China as a competitor. We now see China as a challenger. Here are some practical suggestions on Belt and Road. You take Australia. Suppose there's a Chinese company that wants to invest in cattle in the north of Australia. We welcome their investment because they can take old rundown farms and fix them up. But it doesn't help us reassure the Australian people to badge this as being part of a Belt and Road initiative. They would think it's something sinister, something strategic. It's easier to defend and explain if you say this is a win-win for the Chinese investor and for an Australian community in the north of our continent. Here's another idea. A big Australian investor said, we're excited by the Belt and Road initiative, but we're still looking for the deal flow. Let's say there are plans for 30 airports in Central Asia and South Asia as part of the Belt and Road initiative. Are they going to be privately owned and operated? Will there be an opportunity for private investors to put in their money and get a return on landing fees, landing charges, and ticket sales? They say that's still not clear. There are going to be thousands of kilometres of road built. What extent will there be for private sector investment? Are these roads viable as privately funded toll roads? There's still a lot of detail to be filled in, and as a result, there's a feeling in the Western world we're still waiting to see the detail. And here's another thought. One big investor I know in Australia, an international scale investor, looking at opportunities here, is still focused on opportunities for investment within China. Their assessment is that the continuing urbanisation taking place within China is a bigger and a surer bet for them than more speculative investment in the stand states, for example, associated with Chinese-backed Belt and Road initiatives. The appeal of what's happening in China with infrastructure, with urbanism, the urbanism that Prime Minister Raffarin referred to. I agree with him. I think the quality of city life in China is a manifestation of contemporary Chinese civilization that the world must pay attention to. But that's still a surer bet for many potential investors in the West than what's happening along the belt or along the road. I hope those comments are helpful. They're meant to be helpful.
Okay. Mr. Pan.
I'd like to make some comment based on my some experience and observation, if not experience, but observation, working as South Korean foreign minister, and also most recently 10 years as UN Secretary General. I heard myself then there are some concerns about Belt and Road, particularly from European countries. As President Xi Jinping said this morning, this Belt and Road initiative is supported by at least 90 countries, and it had a very successful launch at the summit level last year. I think this is a very good initiative as number 2 economic power. Now China knows how to share their experience and their assets, their resources with many countries along the lines of Belt and Road. This is 2 tracks, like a marine route and continental land route. This is quite ambitious, and if it is really implemented with this active role of AIIB, then this will give a lot of benefits. Then my observation, not on this Belt and Road, then this kind of China has also been providing a lot of technical assistance to many developing countries in Africa. Japan did. From Asia, it's mainly Japan, South Korea, China, who have been rendering technical assistance in a limited way. It's mostly Japan, they have been very generous. I have seen some observation. This is, I may be wrong. The Japanese and most of the European countries, they just give money. They give money. So build a project without any after service or whatever it may be. Koreans, with the limited fund, they provide some technology and money and try to supervise a certain period. When it comes to China, China has been helping a lot these African countries. You mostly bring your money, your technology, and your labor even forces, people. A lot of people come and build without using much of local labor force. So it doesn't help from the perspective of the countries. It's only the building or factories and plants completely built under the technology, under supervision with the labor force of China. Then when it is over, you just pull out. Then all these machines sometimes become, rusty without being, taken care of all this. And this has been my observation. Therefore, I have heard this kind of concern from the countries along this Belt and Road line, that it may be, after all, Chinese money, Chinese labor, Chinese technology, and we'll get most of the profits or benefit shared by the Chinese. This may be too much critical, not based on real sincere attitude or sincerity from Chinese government, Therefore, it may be good for China when you really implement this Belt and Road Initiative just to take care of the concerns of all those countries in the Belt and Road lines. That's my personal observation. I hope I'm wrong, but that has been my observation, and that's what I heard from many people. That's why there are still some concerns. But basically, this is a very good initiative, very good initiative. This is what China as number 2 economic power should do. When there is a Chinese Forum for Africa, you convene this meeting once in every 3 years, and Japan does, like TICAD, and Korea also does, very limited scales. But Chinese very strong support for Africans. You are gaining a lot of hearts and minds from Chinese people. I was really impressed when Chinese President Xi Jinping in South Africa 2 years ago announced $60 billion, when Japan just announced $35 billion. So now you are a leading country, even in terms of transferring technology and development assistance. So just to take care of some more about the interests and concerns of those people. Yeah, thank you.
好。那我想反过来问一下这个胡小恋女士啊，刚才这个问题是您提出的。您对鲍布卡尔先生和潘基文先生刚才的回答，您觉得回答了您的关切吗？或者说您在实际的从事您的这个工作过程当中，如果遇到了这种压力、这种困惑，那您是怎么来思考它，并且怎么去解决它？
If you have been baffled by such concerns, how do you deal with them? Well, the answers from Mr. Bob Kao and Mr. Ban Ki-moon have relieved me with the impression that some may wear a colored glass to see China and have hold certain doubts on China's sincerity of promoting Belt and Road. But I believe that these two gentlemen are giving a fair comment on China's Belt and Road, and they are not wearing colored glass.
这个“一带一路”确实也不是一个一马平川的这个
The implementation of the Belt and Road Initiative will not be smooth. In the actual execution, there might be problems and difficulties. There are so many countries along the Belt and Road. Each of them have their national conditions, their different requirements and focuses of development. How can we ensure that the initiative will indeed benefit the countries along the Belt and Road? And the key to the success lies in the combination of the project with their national conditions and to leverage China's advantages and experiences. That's why we say one of the basic principles of the initiative is extensive consultation to learn about the country's needs and the role China can play. In this process, the second principle is a joint contribution. As Bob Carr has rightly mentioned, that it is not a one-way deal. Some other countries and investors in other countries may find opportunities of investment in China as well. They want to be involved in the initiative as well. That's what we say joint contribution as another principle of the Belt and Road. We will invite countries along the Belt and Road and other countries to come to invest in China and enjoy the joint contribution as well. That's why President Xi has emphasized the three principles of extensive consultation, joint contribution, and shared outcomes. I've noticed one feature in these two gentlemen's speeches. They have steered clear away from ideology. What they have on mind is the economic benefits, the substantial outcomes which can help the Belt and Road countries. This is also our intention. Thank you.
谢谢您的这段感言啊。刚才做会的同志们提醒我，我们时间这一节的讨论的时间快到了，我们也没有时间再请在座的各位来宾们来提问了。如果要简单总结一下的话，我们其实今天这场讨论呢，很难用1个小时的时间把中国改革开放40年这么丰厚的内涵给它穷尽的去讨论，但是至少我们逐渐接近了一个中国与世界今天在相互打交道过程当中遇到的一个共同的，如果用焦虑或者说用我们共同思考的问题来概括，我们中国还有很多其他曾经落后的国家，经过自己的改革、创新、发展、开放，现在呢快速的前行，我们在这个世界上的位置发生了一点变化。那么这个时候呢，我们自己有时候在想，我们到底是更应该去向这个世界展现我们刚刚拥有的强大，还是要让世界也意识到，我们虽然有了强大的一面，但是我们仍然还有不足、落后的一面。我们其实在思考这个问题。那么很多被追赶者他也在思考，自己曾经很强大。但是今天呢，在有些领域呢，他又发现自己落后了。我们所有的追赶者和被追赶者今天并肩奔跑的国家、民族，其实今天都在面对这种焦虑，都在这个过程当中调教我们共同的认识。那这个过程确实就特别需要像博鳌亚洲论坛这样的场合，我们来更多的去交流。所以最后呢，我想我们共同的期待，潘基文先生呢现在已经是博鳌亚洲论坛的理事会的理事长，不用再单独邀约您，相信未来几年每年这个时候都能在这儿见到您，是这样吧？
On the BFA occasion, right? Ms. Hu, I hope that your Exim Bank of China can meet more fair partners in the world to seek common development and prosperity with you. And I hope Mr. Hafahan can come to China more often every year to promote the Sino-French friendship so that the Mama Hu can develop better. And also for Mr. Fang Xinhai, although you expect a longer speech from President Xi, but his ideas of opening up of the financial sector, I hope that you and your colleagues can turn it into action sooner than later. Yes, so actually we have a general shape. We don't force our products on others. We will be truly open to the world to welcome friends from all over. And also we hope Bob Carr can spread your view about China, your fair and just view about China in a bigger world stage. And we thank you all for your participation and also the audience here. Thank you.